Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience as we got set up. We're going to begin the webinar right now, and we'll hope that others are able to join us through this portal. So welcome to today's webinar on connecting with parents about early warning systems, tips and resources for state education agencies. I'm your moderator, Emily Loney. I'm a researcher with REL Midwest, and I also lead the REL Midwest Dropout Prevention Research Alliance. Here's an agenda for today's webinar. First, we're going to be having a conversation around protecting student privacy and the importance of talking with parents and families about student data. Next, we'll hear from a presenter on strategies to engage parents with early warning system data. And then we'll present a new video that REL Midwest has produced that highlights for families and external audiences what early warning systems are. This is a video that will be available on YouTube for your own use in your outreach strategies to districts and to families in the broader community. And then we'll wrap things up with a question and answer session with our presenters. So quickly, just a quick overview of this platform. You can press return or enter on your keyboard to share your questions and comments with the presenters or your fellow participants. To submit a question during one of the presentations, you'll want to click on the question and answer box, which is located at the right of your screen, and then you can enter questions to our presenters who can respond at the conclusion of all of the presentations. And if you'd like to chat with the other participants who are listening into this webinar, you'll want to click the group chat box, which is found in the word bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. And you'll need to click over there to follow the conversation. It doesn't interrupt you as you're listening, but you're welcome to join there, introduce yourself, and share some other feedback and comments with others who are listening to this webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce the Regional Educational Laboratories. REL Midwest is part of a network of 10 regional educational laboratories funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. Each REL serves a designated region of the country and focuses on the national priority of helping states and districts use data and analysis to address important policy and practice issues with the goal of improving student outcomes. We improve academic outcomes for students by helping states, school districts, and schools systematically use data, conducting and supporting high-quality research and evaluation, and promoting evidence-based decision-making. This webinar is part of the REL Learning Series on early warning systems. We'll post a video, we'll post a link in the group chat box where you can find a whole series of resources and previous webinars and events focused on early warning systems. Briefly, our goals for today are to explore how state education agencies can communicate with parents about data and student privacy, to discuss the challenges, successes, and importance of communicating with parents about early warning systems, and to explore strategies and tools to communicate effectively with parents. And I'm pleased to introduce our great group of speakers that we have for this afternoon's webinar. First, we'll hear from Paige Kowalski. Paige Kowalski is Executive Vice President for the Data Quality Campaign. At VQC, she leads a team of professionals to advance education data policies at the local, state, and federal levels that meet the needs of individuals and improve student outcomes. Paige was previously DQC's Director of State Policy and Advocacy and managed DQC's efforts to support state policymakers and help them understand their roles in encouraging effective data use. Before joining DQC, Paige managed a number of national data initiatives for the Council of Chief State School Officers. Next, we'll hear from Susan Bowles-Theriault. Theriault is a principal researcher at the American Institute for Research and currently directs the College and Career Readiness and Success Comprehensive Center. For over 18 years, Dr. Theriault has led and conducted research that focuses on state and federal education efforts to build the capacity of high-needs districts and schools aiming to prepare students for college and career. As a researcher, Dr. Theriault's expertise is examining the state and district roles in supporting and turning around low-performing schools. And finally, we'll hear from Sarah Rand, who is a partner engagement and communications consultant at the American Institute for Research. In her role, Rand supports AIR's critical mission of making research relevant and accessible to practitioners through a variety of strategies, including public events, visual graphics, and other strategies. So before we begin, we'd love to get a sense of who you are. So I'm going to post a poll, and I'd love for everyone just to take a moment to respond on this to select who you are, and then I'll publish the results in just a moment. Okay, let me give everyone just one more moment. Okay, and let's see published poll results, who you are. It looks like we have a number of individuals who are researchers and others who are staff of education or public policy organizations. Again, we're so glad you're able to join us, and if you'd like to introduce yourself in the group chat box, again, feel free to click over there to share a little bit more about who you are. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paige to begin our conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Paige Kowalski. I am the Executive Vice President of the Data Quality Campaign. It was great for those of you, thank you, who chimed in for who you are. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work that we've done over the last decade around supporting effective data use at all levels, primarily in the early years around state longitudinal data systems. For those researchers on the phone, I'm sure you're familiar with those. But just a quick introduction and overview. We are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and advocacy organization. We've been around since 2005. And our main focus is this big idea that you see basically when stakeholders in education have the right information at the right time, we believe that students excel. And we really think that folks on the phone particularly have a unique power. You're uniquely poised to empower folks in your state with information and really thinking about how are you using that power and are you making sure that those closest to students in particular have access to information. So I'm going to start where I always start, which is talking about why data is so important. Why does data matter? I think a lot of times we can get into these conversations really easily and get into the weeds because we get excited about tools and so many of the cool things that are finally coming online and coming to fruition after so long about talking about this. But I think it's important to start here because when we get caught up in tools and the technology, we forget that there's so many out there that haven't been a part of this conversation. And some of this can be daunting for them. It's in a language they don't understand. They may have privacy concerns. So I think it's always important to ground this conversation in why is this important, the work that you all are doing. And it's because everyone with a stake in education has questions. They need good information to answer. Whether they're a parent, they want to understand if their child is on track. Teachers that want to personalize their own instruction for students, school leaders, policymakers, those of you in state education agencies, I'm sure you get questions constantly from your chief looking at the most current data and trying to understand how to make the most of the resources that you have. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of states that we've seen over the years do such a great job with the data that they have in really getting that value out to folks on the ground at local levels that spend a lot of time, quite frankly, collecting all of this information. I think it's really important to focus on how do we get a service back to them. You likely at this point are familiar with the work that Georgia has done to deliver data from the state longitudinal data system into the hands of educators and parents. They have built the portal that seamlessly connects with the district portal, both for teachers and principals and also now for parents and sometime very soon in the future for students as well, so that they have that rich picture over time of their performance. And then just to stick with sort of the topic of the day around early warning systems, we've showcased the work in Massachusetts. We have a video on our website as well. The link is at the end of this presentation. The work that they did to mine their own data and really look at both, what are the indicators that we know across systems, across states, are these key indicators that we all have in common. But they took a look at their own data as well to try to find some patterns to create flags around and have gotten that out to their schools and been thoughtful about that release and their communication strategy as well. So those are two great states to look at as you think about how do we get this information out, how do we show value for all this work. I think we are missing a slide. And then at the same time, as we talk about this with stakeholders, again, what we found as we went out to talk about getting access to data or an early warning system or something that was really exciting to us, one of the questions we started to get more and more and more in the last couple of years is, what do you mean by student data? And this question stunned us at first, to be honest. We hadn't realized that for the most part, this data conversation, not only was it new, but it was, it's new to education, but it was very new to parents. And they just, for a whole host of reasons, just were not aware that data was being collected about their students and that it was sent somewhere or shared with someone. So we also found while trying to answer those questions, those aren't easy questions to answer. Who has access to it and how is it used and what is it? So we embarked on a road of creating infographics and videos around these infographics to very simply help someone, particularly a parent, a lay person, just a member of the public that isn't steeped in all of the information that we all are, to understand what are we talking about here. And when they see it, then they get comfortable with it and they go, okay, I understand what you're talking about now, and I understand what's in it for me. And I think much like the information your doctor and your bank has about you, you wouldn't be comfortable with them having that if you didn't understand what it was, how they were using it, and also what service you were getting out of them having in the first place. To that end, we created another one. We call this the big vision, the big idea, to really get at all of this work that we're all doing. What is the point of it? And we wanted to make it very student-centered. So we talk about grace here in the middle. And again, this particular infographic has a corresponding video that gets at what is the value of Grace's information to these people who are in her life. And to really bring it home, particularly in light of the privacy conversations that I'm sure every one of you on this call is involved in your state, to really bring that conversation back to the student and to the people in their lives who need that information and who need tools to make sense of it. And then I think from there, once you're both sort of on the same page about what is that value for that student and how desperate we all are not to lose that value, you can start to have that bigger, broader conversation of what are the guardrails we place around that information so that we're not sharing it inappropriately and that it doesn't benefit the student at the end of the day. This is an infographic. Again, there's a video we just released a couple of weeks ago to try to get at that parent stakeholder that's on that vision infographic and really be able to show what it looks like when we are empowering parents with information. And we get at this idea that without information, there are a whole host of actions parents either can't take or are severely hampered in their ability to take those steps. And we do get to this concept of early warning. And I will tell folks all the time, I have an app on my phone that gives me instant access to my dog's veterinary records. I get email alerts saying I haven't logged in and checked something, and they sent me this lovely value proposition of why I would want to sign up for this service. The medical records travel with me if I go across state lines. I have them in an instant if there's an emergency. And I thought, I cannot believe I have this about my dog, and I don't have this about my own sons in elementary school. And wouldn't it be great if parents had that kind of instant access to their child's information, and we were alerted in a timely manner before it's too late to intervene? A couple of absences in, we all know that that doesn't sound like a lot, but having the research behind us, we know that you are headed down a road of chronic absence and what that means. There are vignettes in here around sharing data, having control of that data, but also having that public data that helps parents really hone in on the best fit for their student in terms of programs and other schools. So that's a little bit about how we can use these tools to talk a little bit more and get on a common ground, so we don't go out and say we built an early warning system and you make that assumption that everybody is on the same page as you. But I think it's important also to think about how do we talk to policymakers about how to make that data work for students. And while we've had a lot of luck with the infographics with policymakers, once they're kind of bought in, they want to know, well, what do we do now? How do we actually make this a reality? In April, we released a new roadmap for state policymakers with some recommendations that are grounded in these 4 policy priorities. To measure what matters, being clear about what students should achieve, and having the data to ensure that if students are on track to succeed that. Making data use possible. One thing that we've heard, I'm sure you all have heard, when we go out and talk about data use, we get a lot of teachers and local folks that say, well, that's just not possible. You give them the vision of the early warning system, this idea of timely information at your fingertips, and what we hear all the time is that's impossible. So we've laid out some steps for states to take to make data use possible. Being transparent and earning trust, this one is so important. This is being very clear, whether you're using infographics or any other means. I know a lot of these states now are out doing these SS stakeholder engagement sort of road shows. These are another way to do that, but to be really clear with folks, what are you collecting, how are you using it, how is it benefiting kids, and really working hard to earn their trust so you can demonstrate that you will be good stewards of their data. And then the hardest piece, really guaranteeing access, making sure those parents and students and teachers have access to all that good information so that it isn't just flowing up the system and being stored somewhere, that there's actually value coming back down to the folks who need that data the most to move those needles. So I'll switch a little and talk about privacy. We focused a lot on privacy in the last couple of years, as I'm sure all of you have. We don't see this as an extra add-on. We don't see it as something we can talk about for a few years, put a few laws in place, and walk away from. I think that one of the biggest things we've really wrapped our heads around and really thought through as we talk with states is this is a critical component of it. And yes, we do tend to talk about privacy in terms of compliance, but privacy is wrapped around, do people trust you? Do they feel good about what you're doing with their information? Have you overcome that icky feeling or that scary feeling? So it is much bigger than a law, a federal law, a state law, or even a practice. There's more that goes into that, and it's important to get to that piece as it is to pass laws. So there are a couple different ways that states can approach that. It's building the capacity and culture of responsibility and really being thoughtful about training your educators to use data well, to use it appropriately and ethically. There are fears, legitimate fears out there that people will use this data to hold kids back, to be a gatekeeper. There are those actual policies and practices that need to be put in place, whether it's reimagining FERPA at the federal level or it's thinking through new state laws in privacy and security, communicating constantly and demonstrating the value of this information, and being thoughtful about your data governance structures and who's a part of that. We have been taking a look at state legislative activity for the last 3 years. To date, every state in the union has introduced at least one bill, except for Vermont. But every state on here, if you put all 3 years together, would be colored in. We have had almost 400 bills introduced in the last couple of years, and it has gotten less every year. And while the first year we saw a lot of bills out there that sought to really kind of prohibit some of the activities that states were doing, it has switched a little bit more to regulating the ed tech service providers and app builders and their ability to use student information that they collect. So my last slide is really just a few resources, some of those infographics, the stories we tell, the videos. I also added in here we have a couple of videos from Chicago and their on-track work. They're just great, no matter how passionate we all are about this work and the difference we know it can make for teachers and families. Sometimes we're not the best spokespeople, and we can tend to get a little too wonky and scientific in our talk about on-track and indicators and research, and this is just a way to humanize it. We got students talking about why that on-track system in Chicago is so great, teachers, parents, administrators, researchers themselves that can really tell it in a very different way than all of us here can. So I encourage you to take a look at those to just sort of set the foundation as you go out to have these conversations with folks. And with that, I am going to wrap up and turn it over to Susan Theriault.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was really helpful, and I can see from our attendee list that we have several state education agencies that have been highly involved in this work of early warning systems, and likely kind of in that evolution have come across challenges with the engagement of parents. So as Paige noted in her presentation, an early warning system can help educators in schools identify or flag students who are at risk of not meeting key educational milestones like high school graduation. Of course, the milestones may vary and do frequently apply to high school graduation, but the concept's been expanded, and a great example of this is one that Paige highlighted is the Massachusetts Early Warning Indicator System, which I worked with the state on, and it identifies key milestones along the K-12 trajectory. So, for example, the state provides annual indicators that identify students as early as first grade who are at risk of not being able to read by the end of third grade. So it seems simple and a useful way for adults at the state, district, and school level to use data toward improving student outcomes, right? But for those of you, and many of you on the webinar who've worked with early warning systems and indicators, parental understanding of these indicators and systems really can vary greatly. And even though it seems to be a useful strategy to support students, parental concern for how these indicators are used can really challenge and sometimes even stop implementation of this strategy. Still, leaders and educators who have figured this out, how to engage parents in this process, report a great enhancement to their work and to their ability to get students back on track when parents are engaged. So my portion of the presentation really focuses on some of the key issues parents raise, as well as strategies and examples of strategies I've collected and observed over the past 8 years or so of conducting research and supporting state, district, and school level implementation in the area of early warning systems. So when thinking about parents and early warning systems, one of the critical challenges is really to demystify both what an early warning indicator and system are and how they're used at the school level. Rightly, many parents may be concerned about labeling or tracking students based on these data, and it's necessary for states, districts, and schools to clearly articulate the purpose and use of these data to help students. And these are the key points. Early warning indicators are really based on readily available data that can be checked frequently to monitor changes and especially improvements. So, for example, indicators might be attendance or course performance. They are predictive indicators, and they predict that a student is likely or not likely to meet a key educational goal or milestone. It's not a label, but it's a means for identifying students who need closer attention. And indicators are the early warning systems are based on data or indicators that are mutable. That is, with changes in student actions and behaviors, it's actually possible for a student to get back on track and no longer be at risk. And this is immensely important. The aim of using an early warning indicator and implementing a system is to use it as part of that system to support a student to get back on track. So furthermore, it's critical to explain to parents how this information is used to take action and improve student outcomes. To this end, early warning indicators and accompanying systems allow staff to observe changes in student risk status. They're a tool for educators to target student interventions in a timely way, and they provide information to educators so that adults can take action to support students early before problems get bigger. So for this reason, it's important to move beyond the predictive early warning indicator. Many states, like those that Paige highlighted in her presentation, and many of your states, have rightly used their longitudinal data systems to provide districts and schools with early warning indicators. However, to allay parental concerns about tracking, it is essential to talk about how this helps students and explain the system that supports the use of these indicators. Now, this is an example of an early warning system called the Early Warning Intervention Monitoring System. It was developed as part of the National High School Center with my colleagues and I, and it draws on the key tenets of data use in schools in the context of an early warning system. But what's important about this graphic and the 7-step process is that it's very helpful in explaining how indicators are used as part of a broader system focused on targeting students in need and improving their outcomes. And of particular importance to parents are steps 4, 5, and 6. Those are the steps that are focused on understanding student needs, providing supports, and monitoring students to ensure they are going to get back on track to meet the key milestones. And this demonstrates that action piece that educators are taking to support students. So over the years, I've worked with states, districts, and schools implementing early warning systems throughout the country, and based on this experience, I've identified some of the most frequent questions parents bring forth to educators and leaders who are using early warning systems and early warning indicators to improve outcomes for students. So they are, how are these indicators being used by educators in the school? If my student is at risk, will teachers stop helping him or her? What can I, as a parent, do to improve student engagement? Is this labeling my student? And how is this information shared with others in the school? And is my child's privacy protected? So next, I'm going to discuss some strategies used to engage parents in the use of early warning systems. So as I've already mentioned, communication is critical, and not just after the fact. Communication, but upfront, proactive communication that shares a broad set of talking points, often using multiple modes of communication to reach parents. And it's super important to ensure that staff are aware of these key talking points and that they're on the same page because they're talking to parents with regularity as well. So here are the key points addressed in these types of communication. That early warning indicators are looking at symptoms and not underlying causes, and that parents have an important role to play when trying to figure out what the underlying causes of risk a student's displaying are. That the information is used to take action to support students, and you're going to hear me say that over and over again. And the ultimate goal is to ensure that students meet a critical milestone, so meet high school graduation, for example. So student privacy, as Paige mentioned, is one of the most prevalent concerns raised by parents when thinking about early warning system, and clearly talking about student data in general, but in particular to early warning systems. So, and truthfully, the response by state, district, and school level leaders varies greatly, which Paige also mentioned in her presentation. FERPA is the federal law that dictates student and family privacy rules, and parents are just generally concerned that this type of information may be used to harm their students. Still, it is possible to use early warning indicators and maintain security as many schools and districts have successfully done. And what I've observed is that the boundaries of school rules, and likely playing into what Paige was pointing out about the trust level and around student privacy, are dictated by community concerns and priorities. So it's challenging to provide any kind of blanket advice about privacy, except that district and school leaders have to carefully consider their context when communicating and sharing this information with parents. So another strategy to engage parents in the early warning system work and using information on indicators as a routine part of connection with parents. So this could mean sharing student data at the aggregate level. So observing trends in terms of the students who are displaying risk through general meetings with parents, newsletters, and other communication strategies, I guess weekly emails and those sorts of things. This provides information about what's going on in the school so parents have an understanding of how early warning systems data are being used and changes and adjustments that are being made over time. Another way to engage parents is through one-on-one discussions when a student is identified as at risk by an early warning indicator. You know, it's true that this can be an important part of the diagnostic phase, in fact, whereby educators are able to explore with parents possible underlying causes that have led to the student being at risk and actually come to some agreement about supports, programs, and or interventions that might be useful to support the student to get back on track. So what are the general guidelines for engaging parents that have been learned over years of work with districts and schools? Mainly, any purposeful strategy to engage parents with early warning systems need to be proactive, routine, targeted when needed, and demonstrate the opportunity for action or that action is being taken. So the following are some examples in which districts and schools have engaged parents. So this is an example of a school-level report. It includes fictitious data, and of course, schools should be careful, and this is not a good model, about reporting low numbers of students to protect anonymity. But in this case, it's all fictitious data. But this is a great example of how to share information about trends and what's going on in the school in terms of student risk and changes in student risk over time. So this is an example of a proactive strategy used by the Baltimore County Public Schools, and I have to thank the superintendent and assistant superintendent for allowing me to share this with you. This letter is sent to all parents of high school students at the beginning of the school year. It's like a form letter. And what I like about the letter is that it clearly explains the indicators and the thresholds and the expectations for students. So you can see I'm highlighting out because I know it's a little bit small for you on your screen. The indicators listed below are minimal indicators, and it demonstrates that they expect students to surpass them, and they address attendance, suspension, behavior, grades, and grade point average. So what you're seeing here is that it's routine and proactive and actionable, and that it clearly states goals. Another example of routine information sharing is this example from New Visions. It's an example of a report card, and it's integrated early warning indicator information into the report card. And so as you can see, the information, again, routinely provided to parents because it's part of the report card, and it shows both the indicator and the expectation. So you can see here, there's attendance. You can see that it states that the attendance rate percent is the percentage of school days you have attended the class, so it defines it, and then it tells you that you should have a 92% attendance rate or higher. It also demonstrates credits earned, and so it tells you what the required credits are as well as what the student has accumulated for credits. In this case, it's 30.24 credits, and then also what the student needs to graduate. So this, again, is a letter from the Baltimore County Public Schools, and this is a follow-up to the other letter, and it's only sent to parents of students who have been identified as at risk, so missing a key, being identified through an indicator. This is an example of a targeted and proactive and actionable strategy, and what I like about the letter is that not only does it clearly state why the student is at risk, but it also provides an actionable step for parents to get in touch with an individual at the school to figure out what they can do about their student being at risk. So this is my final example, and it's from an early warning system tool developed by the American Institutes for Research, and it's a student-level report, an individual student-level report. And the report is used by educators during meetings with parents of students who are at risk. And it really exemplifies a targeted approach because the student's been identified as at risk, and demonstrates that there is a routine monitoring of students and showing the actions, that is, the interventions and supports that are being provided to a student. So in general, these are just a few examples of how educators can use strategies to engage parents. And just on a final note, I want to say I've certainly seen the gamut of parental engagement, ranging from completely avoiding parent engagement altogether to actively bringing parents into the early warning system process by obtaining additional help and support for students from parents. Of course, especially at the secondary level, not all parents are highly engaged in student school life, but I can say even with that challenge of bringing parental engagement at the secondary level, in general, leaders and educators who do engage parents report it's an important piece of their use of early warning indicators and early warning systems, and it really enhances educators' ability to support students and get them back on track. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited about the next presentation, which will provide you with some more resources that may be used to engage parents.
Great.
Sarah?
Thanks so much, Susan. Yep, I'm right here. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. This is an exciting part of our webinar where I'm happy to share a new video with you that hopefully you can use to communicate with parents about early warning systems. One quick tech note, if you can't access the group chat for some reason, it might be saying it's not available, you can refresh the platform. Just refresh your web page and it should come back and work. So go ahead and do that if you have a chance. We do want to engage you with some questions and discussion in the group chat, so I hope that works. All right, so as I said, I'm excited to share this video with you. We created this video to be a resource for states and also for districts to communicate about what early warning systems are. Parents might not be familiar with this tool. So the goal is to encourage parents to be aware of these systems and to get involved in their students' education. I'm now going to actually just play the video. If for some reason it doesn't work, I'm going to put the link in the group chat as well, so you can watch it on your own too. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. When I play it, go ahead and make sure that your computer audio is on so you can hear the sound. Great. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I put the link in the group chat, so you can feel free to forward that on, watch it again. So thanks for watching. So the question we have up here is, how can you use this video in your state or your district or in your research work? I can share a few ideas of some things we've been thinking about. Social media is a great place where you can share the link, either on Twitter, on Facebook. If you have Instagram, that's a great place to share it. Email blast. We have sent this out via email blast to a lot of our state education agency contacts. You could potentially share this with parents if you send out emails to parents. Obviously, putting it on a website is a good place to share it. We also want to suggest that you connect this to existing efforts. So your state might already have some efforts surrounding communicating about early warning systems. So this could be a part of that. And also any other parent communication. If you have parent meetings, you could play this video. If you send out other parent emails, set up a TV in your school, could all be options for sharing this resource and for educating parents about early warning systems. Another question here that I'm just going to encourage folks to answer in the chat box is, how can this video help prevent school dropout? We're interested in just hearing some of your thoughts about that. I'll now turn it back over to Emily for questions and discussion.
Thanks, Sarah. So everyone, I'd encourage you to submit some questions for our presenters in the Q&A chat box. I'll get us started with some questions to our presenters, but if something has come to mind as our presenters have been talking, I'd encourage you to put a question in there, and we'll be sure to try to cover it in our last moments of the webinar. So Paige, I had one question for you. You talked about having spokespeople as you communicate about data, and you talked about how sometimes parents or family members or teachers, students can sometimes be effective spokespeople for this. And I'm wondering, in your work, if there are certain kinds of messages that are more effective for teachers to share about, and kind of how to frame the story around why having access and how useful this data is. Just some questions about if there are other kinds of spokespeople that are effective in kind of outreach efforts beyond just SEA staff.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one, you know, and this isn't just data. I would say this is true. You know, if you're sitting at a state education agency, you've probably already realizing this is kind of true across any topic, whether you're looking at teacher quality or standards or testing or opt-out, is that people, the message is important. The messenger is even more important. People are looking to those whom they trust, and parents' first communication around their child's education is with a teacher, and we know that parents trust teachers. So it's really important if you're going to roll out a tool or use data or collect data, that you ensure that your teachers understand, first, that they are finding benefit in it, because if your teachers are just frustrated with it, that will come across to parents. And you will hear more of don't collect the data and we want to opt out of assessments. But if your teachers are finding real value in it and they understand and can make the connections and are empowered and have tools to actually use that information to improve their own practice and tailor instruction for kids, then that will get across to parents more than any messaging or brochure or talking points. I would also say, you know, while the messenger is so important, leadership matters. And I love the examples that Susan gave from Baltimore County. It's really important for leadership to communicate this to schools and to people at large and have their name associated with this work to parents and be really clear about why it's important. It really should come from every level. But like I said, long before they ever get to some of those pieces from superintendents or from states, they do talk to teachers, and they probably have an opinion before they ever get to whatever the state is sending out. I would also encourage you to think about, don't just say it one time and in one way. You've got to hit them on Twitter, on Facebook, with a piece of paper and a letter, with an email, through the teacher, through the state directly, on websites, in person in town hall meetings. I mean, you have to kind of hit, because everyone gets information differently. And you can't say these things enough times. And I would also encourage folks who have elected constituencies, your state board members, your legislators, to really help them talk about this as well when they're going back into their districts to talk to stakeholders.
Thanks, Paige. Susan, I have a question for you. I know that we've talked a little bit on today's webinar about the move when we're talking about dropout prevention to move from conversations around compliance to more kind of the utility and the usefulness. And I'm wondering, in your work with early warning systems, how you've seen some states or districts frame their conversation so that it's not a conversation around compliance or kind of checking something off, but really highlighting both the utility of the data and the interventions to support students.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So one of the really key communication pieces, and one of the best ways I've seen a state education agency articulate that is actually in Massachusetts. They have a great example. They are very clear about what an early warning indicator is and what an early warning indicator is not. And so they're very clear that it's not an accountability measure. Any kind of predictive leading indicator should not be an accountability measure because it's not right all the time. It's not 100% right. You should actually be looking at the outcomes. And they're also very clear about how they want these data to be used, that they're used to support educators in making better decisions about students. And they're also to be used in conjunction with local data and professional teacher judgment on what students need. They're all trained professionals, and the idea is to kind of ground those decisions in data, not just the early warning indicator. So they're very clear about that. The other thing that I've noted is that, and it's not just in Massachusetts, but in other states that have early warning indicator systems, they are very clear and they're stewards of these information. So often people want to use this information in different ways and manipulate it and maybe kind of come to some conclusions that maybe aren't appropriate for this type of data. And so there's a stewardship and leadership at the SEA level to ensure that researchers using this information, for example, aren't using it in a way that's inappropriate, which in turn leads to what Paige was talking about with mistrust between the community and parents and the schools, districts, and the state. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Although we had to start late, I want to make sure that everyone is able to attend to other things that they might have coming up at the end of the hour. In the group chat box, I've just posted a link to our feedback survey. This should only take you a few minutes of time to complete, but it's really important to us to better understand how to improve our work, what was valuable to you about this webinar. So please take a moment to click over. We'll also send it out in our thank you for this webinar. And then just briefly want to thank you all for joining us for this conversation. It's been really valuable to hear from our presenters who I have here and their contact information. I'm sure they would love to continue the conversation if you'd like to reach out to any of them individually. And again, we'll be sending you the link to that video as well as the survey so that you're able to share the resources that we've featured on today's webinar with your colleagues. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again on another Rel Midwest webinar.